Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf. What Daf are we studying today? From what I can tell, we're studying Daf Ches. Daf 8 of Masechta Pesachim. Again, another home run today. I mean, Masechta Pesachim has just been very, very good to us. So, Daf Ches discusses reasons to use a candle rather than a torch. The idea that places where you do not bring chametz, you do not have to do a bedikas chametz over there. We discuss doing bedikas chametz in a hole in the wall. Do you have to check the holes in the wall? Some interesting outcomes of there, including shluchei mitzvah einan nizokin, that messengers of a mitzvah, that people on their way to do a mitzvah do not get harmed, which is an interesting concept. We're going to discuss that a little bit. Some interesting experience design. Very, very, actually, I love it. It's very, very interesting. Things to take into consideration when you're planning an event. We'll get there. And then the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in a wine cellar vis-a-vis bedikas chametz. Let us begin on Daf Zayin Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom, last line of the page. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, in bodkin lo le'or hachamav lo le'or levana. You do not do bedikas chametz with the light of the sun, nor with the light of the moon, v'lo le'or avuka, nor with the light of a torch, el le'or haner. You use a candle, one flame. Sha'or haner yafel bedika, because the light of a candle is very good for searching for chametz. And even though there's no explicit proof in the Torah, however, as we saw twice yesterday, zeicher ledavar, there is a reference to it. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Shivas yom soy lo yimatzeh b'vatechem, that for 7 days leaven shall not be found in your houses. Ve'omer vayichapis bagadol heichel, and of course it says uvakaton kila vayimotzeh. Anybody know? How do I know that? It didn't say that whole pasuk in the Gemara, but I knew the rest of it by heart. Do you know why I knew the rest of it by heart? It's because it's from Parshas Miketz. Parshas Miketz is my bar mitzvah parsha, if anybody was wondering. Okay, let's go weiter. So, it says Yimatzeh by Chametz, it says Yimatzeh by the sack of Binyamin, and it also says Vayichapes, and it also says in where was this pasuk? In Tzfanya, Vayisahi achapes es Yerushalayim baneris, that at that time I will search in Jerusalem baneris, which is already candles, V'omer ner Hashem nishmas adam, chofes kol chadrei baten, that the candle of God is the soul of man who searches inside of everybody. So just the same thing. This is the third time we're seeing the same kind of bunch of psukim to show that b'tikas chametz is done with the candle. Now, Hai or acham echida. I mean, we just said that do not do b'tikas chametz with the light of the sun. What are we talking about? Inemu b'chatzer. Okay, so are we talking about like outside? Like you don't have to do b'tikas chametz like in your outside courtyard? Is that what we mean? And then when you're outside, don't use the sunlight? Ha'amar Rav chatzer ena tzricha bedika. But Rav already said that a chatzer, we all know what a chatzer is. A chatzer, we can't forget. It's permanently branded in our brains. So chatzer ena tzricha bedika. So Rava says, guess what? A chatzer, while it might need an erev, it doesn't need a bedikas chametz. Because there are ravens over there, and the ravens are going to, whatever bread there may have been, the ravens will eat. So therefore, you don't have to do a bedikas chametz b'chlal in a chatzer. El b'achsadra. Oh no. So when you say achsadra, come on, what do you think? Achsadra b'bikra, pitikra yard v'sose, machlokas Rav and Shmuel, right? Anyways, well, it's a good thing. So achsadra b'bikra, portico, right? This like structure with open walls. So, is that what we're talking about? And we're saying don't use the sunlight. Even in there, use like a candle. But Rava says that a portico actually is able to be done the bedikas chametz with its sunlight. So it's talking about a skylight in a room. If you have a room with a skylight, do not rely upon the sunlight, rather use a candle. And where are we talking about? But if we're talking about right opposite the skylight, Well, what's the problem? Why should right opposite the skylight be any different than a portico? I mean, you have this place that has a roof over it, but there's plenty of sunlight, so you can use the sunlight. So ela listadin. So it's talking about the sides. There we go. So if you have a room that has a window, I'm in a room with a window, so you would be able to theoretically, although it's night outside right now, so that wouldn't work so good, but you'd theoretically be able to do the bedikas chametz opposite the window during the day and use the sunlight. However, to the sides, where the room is still light because there's light coming through the window, but it's not directly opposite the window, maybe to the sides, so then do not rely upon the sunlight, use a candle. Vavuka lo, what's wrong with using a torch, right? We said, okay, so don't use sunlight. We just explained that means in a room, don't on the sides of the skylight. Not necessarily windows, right? Skylight. Well, what about a window? We didn't really discuss windows, actually. Specifically, we discussed skylights. Maybe a window would be the same thing. I don't know the answer. But that Brysad also said, do not use a torch. The question is, why not? Vavuka lo, don't use a torch. V'amar Rava. But Rava said, what does the pasuk mean? V'noga kor tihye karnai miyado lo v'sham chavyon uzo. That apparently this is the pasuk of Tudas. David understands this pasuk as referring to the the luchos. But it means, right, that you can also, I think, understand this pasuk in the context of tzaddikim, that they will have a light and they will radiate light, like it says by Moshe Rabbeinu Kikaran or Panov, that his face was radiating v'sham chavyin uzo. By God is his strength. Okay, but the drasha is this. It's not such an easy pasuk to explain. But the drasha is lamat tzaddikim domin. B'fnei Shechina, what are tzaddikim like relative to the presence of God? Kiner b'fnei ha'avuka, they are like a candle before a torch. So a torch is a reference to God. So clearly there's nothing wrong with the torch. So if that's the case, why would you want to avoid using a torch for b'dikas chametz? Rava says, avuka la'avdalah mitzvah min mufchar. Rava also says, we're going to learn later on in the parak, Arvei Pesachim, at the end of Masechta Pesachim, it says that when it comes to Havdalah, the best thing you could possibly use is a torch. So why are we hating on torches? We seem to have very good connotations of torches. So Amar Rav Nachman, we have 4 answers now. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, I love seeing Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak after we had a hiatus. I don't remember him saying Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak too much in Masechta Eruvin, but it's great to have him back here at Masechta Pesachim. So it says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ze yachol lachnisu l'chorin v'lestakin v'zeinu yachol lachnisu l'chorin v'lestakin, for very practical reasons. That a candle you can get into small little places, into holes and cracks, whereas a torch you are unable to get into holes and cracks because it's big and dangerous, and you wouldn't do that. Rav Zvid Amar, ze'or lefanav ze'or lacharav. Interesting. Rav Zvid says, well, a candle's light shines in front of it, whereas a torch's light shines behind it. Okay, great. I'll take his word for it. And therefore, we're going to want to focus the candle on what's in front of us. Rav Papa Amar, hai bayis v'lo bayis. Rav Papa says, well, a torch is kind of scarier, meaning if you're using a torch inside of your house in order to search for your chametz in very small places, you're going to be very nervous. They're going to light your house on fire, and you're not going to be focused enough on searching for chametz. So therefore use a candle, which is a lot tamer, and you could focus on searching for the chametz. Ravina Amar, hay mashach nahor v'mikatif iktufe. Ravina says that the flame of a candle is kind of stable and straight and tall, whereas the flame of a torch is jumping all over the place. And therefore, we want to be able to focus the light, and therefore use a candle rather than a torch. Says the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah, right? We're moving on in the Mishnah. Kol makom she'en machnisin chulei. We said that any place where you know with certainty that you do not bring chametz into that place, well then, no need to do a b'dikas chametz. Kol makom lasuye mai. The Gemara asks, when we say kol makom, kol means all, everything. That's a very inclusive word. So the Gemara wants to know, what are we including that is not listed in our Mishnah? What are the types of places that are included in this halacha that that would be exempt from b'dikas chametz? So, where am I? So it's to include that which the rabbis taught. So if you have holes in your walls in a house, and you could put chametz in these holes in the wall, So if they are very high or very low, so it's an inconvenient place to put chametz, vigaga yatzia, or a roof that's on an angle, on a downward slope for like some kind of, I don't know, shed of sorts that is next to your house, vigaga migdal, or if you have a closet that is outside, and so we're talking about on top of the closet, virefes bakar, your like cattle pen, I guess, vilulin, and chicken coops, umatbein, and places where you keep grain, ve'otzros yayin, and places where you store wine, ve'otzros shemen, places where you store oil. All of those places in tzrichim bedika, you do not need to do bedikas chametz, because the assumption is that you're not bringing chametz into there. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer says, Reb Shimon Gamliel, mita cholekes b'soch habayis. If you have in your house, you have some kind of a bed, and it divides up areas of your house, and you can also put things underneath this bed. Umafsekes, and there's space between, let's say, like, I don't know, let's just say the mattress area and the floor, like the area under the bed. So you could store stuff there. So tzricha bedika, you would have to do a bedikas chametz under there, because you might store chametz there. V'raminu, but we have a question. Chorshe ben adam lachavero, if you have Reuven and Shimon, they share a wall, and there's a hole in the wall, and you could put chametz in that hole. So zebodek ad makom sheyodo magas, zebodek ad makom sheyodo magas, v'ashar mevatlo belibo. So Reuven sticks his hand in as far as he can go, and really he searches for chametz for in the width of the wall and the thickness of the wall that is as far as his hand could possibly reach. And Shimon does the same thing. And if there's more area that neither of them can reach, well, then they're just mevatel it belibo. They just do a bittul and say, look, if there's any chametz there, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, meaning it's not mine, it's hefker kafir da'ara. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, mita cholekes b'soch habayis, if you have this bed that's dividing up space in your house, ve'etzim b'avonim sturim tachteo, and you have trees and stones underneath this bed, umafsekes, and there's also area between the bed and the floor. Although, I guess by definition, there's going to have to be area by the floor, because there's trees and stones. But I think what it means is at least that there's space between the bed and the stone area. Eina tzricha bedika, you don't have to do a bedika. Now, kashamita amita kashachorin achorin. Let us recap. The first brisa said that when you have these holes in the wall that are high up and low down, you do not have to do bedikas chametz. They are an example of a place that would be patur from bedikas chametz. Yet, this later brisa said that you have Reuven and Shimon who share the wall, they have to do bedika as far in these holes, they have to do this bedika as far as their hands go. What's going on? First we said you're patur, then we said you're chayiv to do bedika. Next, when it comes to this bed, Reb Shimon Gamliel first said that you do not need to do bedika underneath the bed, but then we have a brisa that says that you do have to do bedika underneath the bed. So, actually the opposite. Reb Shimon Gamliel said that you have to do bedika underneath the bed, but then the brisa says that according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, the same Reb Shimon Gamliel, you do not need to do bedika under the bed. So who could tell me what's going on over here? Or who could tell the Gemara what's going on over here? The Gemara will tell you what's going on over here. Chorin achorin lo kasha. Okay, let's start with the holes in the wall. That is no problem. Well, the first brisa was actually pretty clear that when it says that you do not need to do bedikas chametz in these holes in the wall, it's talking about where they're too high or too low, a place where it's inconvenient and you wouldn't really put chametz over there. That's why you do not need to do bedikas chametz. But vaha b'mitzai, when we're talking about Reuven and Shimon who share a wall and there's a hole and they do bedika as far as their hand can go, well, that's talking about where the hole is kind of is in the middle, it's in a convenient place where you would put chametz and access chametz. So therefore, that is why they have to do bedika. Mita lo kasha, and also the beds are no problem. If the bed is very tall, so therefore you're probably gonna, there's more of a likelihood that you'll put chametz under it, so then you would do a bedikas chametz. If the bed was not very high off the ground and it's inconvenient to put things underneath it, so then you don't have to do bedikas chametz. Now, your wine cellar a place where you store wine does not require bedikas chametz, but we learn in the brisa, otzrus yain tzarich bedika, that places where you store wine, you do need to do a bedikas chametz. Otzes shemen ein tzarich bedika, but places where you store oil does not need a bedikas chametz. So on the one hand, we said earlier that both places where you store wine and places where you store oil do not need bedikas chametz. Those were examples of things that do not require bedikas chametz. Yet we have a brayso that's saying while places where you store oil are exempt from bedikas chametz, but places where you store wine, you would nonetheless have to do bedikas chametz. Here, what are we talking about? B'mistapek, it's talking about where you generally take wine during the meal. Meaning, if you have a wine cellar and generally in the middle of the meal you run out of wine, you run down to the cellar, grab some more wine. You might have some bread with you, or Rashi on the Mishnah on the first daf explained that maybe you'll have like a waiter who works. Maybe you're at a restaurant or you're at your house, whatever it might be. There's a waiter who might run into that wine cellar with some bread. So that is why you would have to do bedikas chametz. Yachi shemenami. Well, if that's the case, then why should where you store oil be any different? Right? We said that where you store wine, you have to do bedikas chametz. Where you store oil, you do not. I mean, in the same brayso said that while you would have to do bedikas chametz in your wine cellar, you would not have to do the same. You would not have to do bedikas chametz where you keep your oil. The question is, what's the difference? So the Gemara answers. This is very interesting. Shemen yesh keva la'achila. I mean, it's common sense also, but yain and keva l'shtia. Very interesting. Oil, you can know approximately how much oil you're going to need during the meal. So in advance, you can get more oil, right? Like the likelihood of saying, "Hey, we finished our oil. Let's grab some more oil." Everyone's really enjoying the oil, so that's probably less common than, "All right, we finished one bottle. Let's grab another bottle." So because it's more predictable how much oil you will need in advance, so the likelihood of you having to run into the oil place in the middle and grab more oil in the middle of the meal while you have your bread with you is not as common. Whereas wine, it's more common. You're in the middle of the meal, you ran out of wine, you want to keep the people happy before they get restless, so that you run, grab another bottle of wine, you have your whatever it is that you're eating with you. So therefore, in that case, you would have to do bedikas chametz in the wine cellar. Tani Reb Chia taught asu otzris sheichar bebavel ka'otzus yain be'eretz Yisrael b'mistapek. Very interesting. Says Reb Chia that they made the storage places of beer in Bavel like the storage places of wine in Eretz Yisrael b'mistapek. That is, that when people, if you have a beer cellar where people would go in the middle of the meal to grab more beer, so then you'd have to do a bedikas chametz there, which is very interesting because you might be thinking that isn't beer chametz. So this, I guess, would be, in my mind, this would be another indication that the beer in those days was date beer. And I guess date beer wouldn't necessarily be chametz. Barley beer, I mean, I'm pretty sure is chametz. We don't drink beer on Pesach. I'm like pretty certain that that's true. So I guess that we're talking about date beer, which is not chametz. But if you generally go into the beer cellar, the date beer cellar, to grab more beer in the middle of the meal, and you have bread with you when you do that, so therefore you have to do bedikas chametz. Rav Chizda beidagim ein tzarich bedika. Rav Chizda says that the place where you keep your fish, you do not, probably, maybe smoked fish or something, So you don't need to do bedikas chametz. So ve'atanya tzrichim bedika. But we learn in the brayso that you do have to do bedikas chametz where you keep your fish. Lo kasha b'rava ve'abezutre. Depends if you're talking about big fish or small fish. Big fish, you're probably, you're not going to run back in the middle to get a whole big fish, right? But small fish, which maybe is more of like an appetizer kind of thing, which, if you run out, you might come back to refill. So then you would have to do bedikas chametz if you're going to grab more in the middle of the meal. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna beimilche uvekeret tzarich bedika. Says Rabba bar Rav Huna that the place where you keep your salt and the place where you keep your wax, you have to do bedikas chametz, like where you keep your candles. Amar Rav Papa beitzivei uveitamrei tzarich bedika. Says Rav Papa that where you keep your wood and where you keep your dates, you need to do bedikas chametz. Says the Gemara Tana in Mechayven also la'achnis yadu l'chorim v'l'stakim livdok mipnei sakana. Very interesting. So we have a brayso that says that we do not require that somebody stick his hand into a hole to check for chametz, because we're concerned about a sakana, some kind of dangerous situation. Okay? We had just said a few minutes ago that if the hole in the wall is conveniently located, then you would have to do bedikas chametz. But over here we're saying you don't have to because it's dangerous. My sakana, what's so dangerous? If we're concerned about, well, maybe there's a scorpion in there and it can bite you. Well, kimishtamish, heichi ishtamish. Well, then how did he get the chametz in there in the first place? Right? If it's so dangerous, then why would there be chametz over there? So letzricha de nafal. Oh, so we're talking about where the wall fell down. So meaning there was once upon a time a wall, and this wall had a hole in it, and it was very convenient to keep your chametz there. The wall now fell down, and the question is, do you have to do a bedikas chametz on this fallen wall? So, meaning, do you have to stick your hand into this fallen wall, into the horn it's stuck into these holes and cracks, into these holes and cracks in order to check for chametz? Inafal lamali bedika. But if the wall fell down, well then, why would you have to look for chametz in the first place? That if you have chametz that, a bunch of stuff fell on it, well then, like a bunch of stones and stuff, and it's trapped under a bunch of stones, well then, it's considered like it's mivuar. It's considered like it's gone. It doesn't exist. So therefore, why would you have to do a bedika chametz on this fallen wall in the first place? So hasam she'ena kelev yachol lechapes acharav, hachak she'kelev yachol lechapes acharav. So where you don't have to do bedika chametz is where it fell down to such a degree where even a dog would be unable to get into this pile and retrieve the chametz that is trapped in there. However, if a dog would be able to get in there and find this chametz, well then you would have to do a bedikas chametz. So that is what we're talking about, where you had a wall, and in the wall there were holes, and you kept chametz in the holes. The wall now fell down, but not really fell down, like where the chametz was mama's trapped and a dog wouldn't be able to find it, but a dog would be able to find it, and therefore you have to do a bedikas chametz. However, we're concerned that in this pile of stones, there might be scorpions hiding out, and therefore you would not have to do bedikas chametz. But didn't Rabbi Elazar say that messengers of a mitzvah, people who are going to do a mitzvah, do not get harmed? And that if that's the case, well then, what's the concern? You're doing a mitzvah, you're doing bedikas chametz. Of course the scorpion is going to leave you alone. Amar Ashi shema te'evad lo machat v'osi la'ayune basra. So Rav Ashi says, well, we're concerned that maybe, while you're looking for chametz, you'll also remember that you have a needle that you lost in there as well. Or maybe while you're looking for the chametz, you'll lose your needle. And therefore now, since you're dividing your attention between looking for chametz as well as looking for your needle, so it's not completely 100% mitzvah oriented, so therefore you might get bitten by a scorpion. But who cares if you have two motives? Who cares if in addition to searching for your chametz, you're also searching for a needle? Why is that a problem? We learn in the Brisa. If somebody says, I'm giving tzedakah so that my son lives, or I'm giving tzedakah so that I should go to the world to come. So I raise it tzaddik gomer. There's no problem with that. Meaning, as Rashi says, tzaddik gomer b'davar zeh. Meaning he's completely a tzaddik in what he's doing. There's nothing wrong with what he's doing, right? Which means that there's nothing wrong with like doing two things at once, with doing the mitzvah of tzedakah while also having your own motives, or in our case, doing the mitzvah of bedikas chametz while also intending to find your needle. So if that's the case, once again, I thought shluchei mitzvah in a nizoken. He's doing bedikas chametz. Who cares if he's also looking for his needle? The fact of the matter is, he should be protected because he's doing bedikas chametz. Why should we be concerned about scorpions? The Gemara says, well, we're concerned that, maybe after he's done with the bedikas chametz, that is, he's going to continue to look for this needle, or maybe he'll start to look for this needle, whatever it is, and at that point, he will get bit by the scorpion. So therefore, we say, just don't worry about it. You don't need to search for anything in this pile. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak mishum sakonas hanochrim. We're concerned about Gentiles. If you search in your wall for this chametz, we're concerned about Gentiles. What does that mean? Uflimohi, and it's the Tana Plimo's opinion. The Tana, as we learn in the Brisa, Chorshe ben Yehudi la Ramoi. If you have a hole in the wall in a wall that is shared between a Jew and an Aramaean, a non-Jew, bodek ad makom sheyodom agas v'ashar mivato b'libo. So the Yid on Erev Pesach does a bedikas chametz until the point in the wall where his hand can reach, and at that point he stops and he's mivato the rest of it. Plimo Amar kol atzmo eno bodek mipnei sakana. Plimo says, don't go near that wall. Do not do any bedika in that wall because of the danger. My sakana, what danger? Inem sakanas kshafim. If we say, well, the concern about sorcery, what sorcery? I bet you think that they're saying, well, maybe the non-Jew did some kind of witchcraft in there, some heebie-jeebies. That's what I thought also. But that's actually not what it's talking about. Upon further analysis, I realized that it means that actually the non-Jew is going to suspect what in the world is the Yid doing in the wall with a candle at night. The Yid must be doing some kind of hocus pocus, and then the non-Jew might get nervous and can create an uncomfortable, perhaps even dangerous, as we said, sakana, a dangerous situation between them. So therefore, avoid it. You know, according to Plimo, you would not do a bedikas chametz if you share in the hole in the wall which you share with a Gentile. So ki yishtamish echi yishtamish. But if that's the case, then how did the chametz get in there in the first place? Well, awesome. Ki yishtamish imam v'naora v'lo masag adaite. Well, because when he put the chametz in there, it was during the daytime, and he wasn't, being shady and going out at night with a candle. He just, nothing wrong with putting a little chametz in a hole in the wall. Here, it is at night, and he's with a candle, and it's a whole kind of thing, and maybe the Gentile neighbor might get a little spooked and think that he's being magicked, sorcered, and then he might get upset. Okay. For Amar Rabbi Elazar, shluchei mitzvah einin nizokin. But didn't Rabbi Elazar say that people doing mitzvahs don't get damaged? So heicha d'shchiach hazei kashani. I love this. It's brilliant. So yes, we do have this concept of shluchei mitzvah einin nizokin, that if somebody's doing a mitzvah, they won't get damaged. But there's also the concept of, who could tell me? Don't be a nudnik. Right? Meaning, yeah, sure, shluchei mitzvah einin nizokin, but don't ask for it. Right? Don't ask for it, and then ask why something bad happened. So therefore, I guess in a situation where going out with a candle at night might create uncomfortable vibes. So just avoid it. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, by Shmuel, Vayomer Shmuel says to God, Eich elech, how can I go to Yishai's house to appoint one of his sons as a king? V'shama Shaul v'aragani, and Shaul will hear and he will kill me. And therefore, so Shmuel was concerned, even though he was going to do a mitzvah to appoint the next king on God's behest. Nonetheless, Shmuel says, look, the fact of the matter is, if Shaul finds out, he'll kill me. So Vayomer Hashem eglas baka tikach biyadecha v'gomer. So God made a ploy and said, go with some cattle and then make it as if you're bringing a sacrifice. Fine. Very interesting. Ba'omine mirav, they asked a kasha from Rav, Hane b'nei beirav d'dari b'baiga. If you have students who live in these villages that are in an open area and they want to travel to the yeshiva either very early in the morning or late at night when the mazikim are out. So can they go to the yeshiva, to the Beis HaMedrash, when it's very early or very late and it's dark out and there could be mazikin? So Amrlu Neise, Rav said to them, let them go to the Beis HaMedrash. Olai val tzavorai. And if anything happens to them, it is upon me and my neck, right? Rav is so convinced that nothing will happen to these yeshiva students because they're going to learn. The shluchei mitzvah eina nizokin. Nezil mai, but what about the way back? Oh, that's a good kasha, right? So to go to the Beis HaMedrash, okay, they're on the way to do a mitzvah. What about the way back? They're going to sleep. That's not a mitzvah. So, or maybe they're going to eat or something. So Amar Lahu, so he said to him, Lo Yadana. He says, I don't know. Okay. Itmar Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Elazar shluchei mitzvah eina nizokin lo ba'alichasan v'lo b'chazirasan. That says Rabbi Elazar that people on their way to do a mitzvah do not get harmed, not on their way there and not on their way back. Which is also interesting because Rav did not know the answer about the way back, and Rabbi Elazar, who was a student of Rav, seems to know the answer. And he's saying that just like they do not get damaged on the way there, they also do not get damaged on the way back. Kiman, who is that like? Ki'aitana, it's like the following Tana, the Tanya, Isi ben Yehuda Omer, says Isi ben Yehuda, Klape she'omer Torah, that when the Torah says, V'lo yachmod ish es artzecha, that when you go to be Ola Regel, what happens? The entire Israel empties out during the Shalosh Regalim to go to Jerusalem. Mamish, you have entire cities that are empty. People are going to pillage and they're going to steal stuff, right? Wrong. Nobody is going to desire, is going to covet your property when you leave your house to go be Ola Regel in Jerusalem. Your cow is going to be grazing in the dirt, I guess the grass probably, and no wild animal is going to harm it. Your chicken is going to be pecking around in the garbage, and no weasel is going to harm it. And this is now a kavachomer for us. If your cows and your chickens, that it's so easy to make them into prey, and yet there's a guarantee that because you're going to be Ola Regel, that they will not be harmed. B'nei Adam she'ein darkan lazuk, people who don't generally get harmed by these animals, so al achas kama v'chama, then certainly, or I guess harmed in general, then certainly we will not. The darkan lazuk de adam isle mazola. Oh wow! So Rashi says that people don't necessarily get damaged because a person has a mazel, as we learned about. What was that? In Masechta Shabbos at the very end, right? Ein mazel Yisrael. But that didn't mean that Yidden don't have mazel b'chlal. It meant that they're able to daven and override their mazel. But and Rashi says ve'enu mayir lios nizak begufo. They don't generally get damaged. So therefore, if these animals that generally get damaged will not get damaged when you're going to go be Ole Regel, so then certainly people she'ein darkon lazuk, that do not generally get damaged, alachas kama v'chama, certainly they will not get harmed when they are going to be Ole Regel. So we see that on the way to be Ole Regel, shluchei mitzva ein nizokin, and you will not be harmed. V'chama, I'm sorry, where am I? Okay, alachas kama v'chama. Ein li ela ba'alicha b'chazir minayin. Okay, so that teaches me that when the Yidden go to Yerushalayim to be Ole Regel, they will not be harmed. How do I know that when they on their way back, they will also not be harmed? Tamaloma, therefore it says that it says that the next day after Yom Tiv you will, and this is by the Korban Pesach, I think, by Pesach, so it says you'll wake up the next day and you'll go back to your tent. I.e., what it's saying is that even after the regel is over and you're going back home, you will arrive, right? You will go and arrive at your tent, i.e., you will arrive home safely. So even afterwards, that you will go and find your tent in peace. So once already we have a pasuk that teaches us that you will arrive home safely. Well, then if you're going to arrive home safely after you've done the mitzvah, then certainly when you're on your way to doing the mitzvah, you will arrive to do the mitzvah safely. So why do I need the first pasuk that teaches me that when I go to do a mitzvah, I will arrive healthy and unscathed? I mean, I could just make a kavachomer from the fact that when I get home, right, on my way back, I will be unscathed. Well, then certainly on my way there, I will be unscathed. So lichad Rabbi Ami, we need that first pasuk to teach me that on your way you will arrive safely. For Rabbi Ami, the Amr Rabbi Ami, Kol Adam sheyesh lo karka ola l'regel v'shein lo karka ein ola l'regel. This is very interesting. I don't know if we paskin this way, but Rabbi Ami says that only somebody who owns real estate, who owns property, is Ola Regel, goes to Jerusalem for the holidays. But if you do not own property, then you do not. And he learns it out from that initial pasuk of V'lo yachmod ish es artzecha. Nobody will covet your land when you go to be Ola Regel. So that implies that you have land that you're leaving to be Ola Regel. If you don't have land, then you do not actually have to be Ola Regel to go to Jerusalem, which is very interesting. This is where I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the daf, that in the introduction, that we're going to get into experience design, which is really interesting. Listen to what the Gemara says over here. Amar bi Avin bar Rav Ada Amar bi Yitzchak mipneima ein peres ginosar b'Yerushalayim. How come they don't have peres ginosar in Yerushalayim? Who remembers peres ginosar? It was daf, I think, Mem Daled of Masechta Brachos, and also daf Lamed of Masechta Eruvin. The peres ginosar were these very, very sweet fruits, and Rabbi Yochanan could apparently eat lots and lots of them. So how come in Jerusalem they don't have amazingly sweet, delicious fruits? Kidei shelo yu ole regalim omrim, so that the people who go to Jerusalem for the festivals should not say, wow, if we would have only, if the only reason that we went to Jerusalem was to eat those amazing, delicious fruits, that would have been enough. Nimtzes aliyah shelo lishma, which means that they didn't really come to Jerusalem in the first place for the right reason, which was to be oleh regel, and to come for the holiday to Jerusalem. They really just went and got distracted by these delicious fruits. Let's go weiter. Why do they not have the Tiberian hot springs in Jerusalem? For the same reason, that you shouldn't have people come and say, wow, that festival was so geschmack. Those Chame Tiveria were so amazing. If, who knows, maybe he didn't even make it to bring his Olas Re'iyah and Shalmi Chagiga, right? He was just hanging out in the hot springs, right? He says, if only it was enough to get to the hot springs, that would be enough. And then it turns out that he didn't go to be Ola Regel Lishma. Meaning, it's very interesting to think about, I don't know, imagine like the event planners who are planning for the Shalosh Regalim, and they think, wow, why don't we get Perez Ginosar? Why don't we get Chami Tiveria? I guess it's a lesson about, we got a motorcycle, Chevra. So it's a lesson about like event planning over here. The Gemara is teaching us, right? I guess I'm not an event planner, but I can only imagine, right? That you have to take into account, like, will something be enhance or will it detract? Will it be a distraction from the main thing? I don't know. Maybe if you're like planning a wedding or something, like, and you have all these cool things, are people going to be distracted and nobody's going to like be where you want them to be because they're distracted by these other things? Super, super interesting, right? Right. Let's go on. So now the Gemara says, and with regard to what did they say that the 2 rows in the wine cellar, you don't have to check for chametz. So the Gemara says, Martev mandachar shmei, right, or the basement. Who said anything about a basement, right? Meaning what was going on in the Mishnah over there, right? It was saying that wherever you don't bring any chametz, so you don't have to do bedikas chametz, and then all of a sudden they're talking about a basement. Who said anything about a basement? So the Gemara says, this is how you have to read the Mishnah. Any place where you do not bring chametz there, well, if you don't bring chametz there, so then you could skip it. You don't have to do bedika over there. And as we learned earlier, also where you keep your wine and where you keep your oil, you also don't have to do bedikas chametz. And when they said that you would have to do bedika in a wine cellar, so so that when we say that you have to do bedikas chametz in the wine cellar, it's only the first 2 rows, and we're going to have a whole explanation now about what these 2 rows are. But 2 rows in the wine cellar, because that is where you bring chametz if you were to take wine in the middle of the meal. And now we're going to get into the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about what these 2 rows in the wine cellar are. And with that, we are going to close up Daf Ches. Let's go weiter. So says the Gemara, really going forward in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omer Shtei Shuris v'chulei, Omer Rav Yehuda Shtei Shuris she'amru min ha'aretz v'ad Shmei Korah. So Rav Yehuda says something important, which is going to be basically the assumption for the rest of the daf, which is that what we're talking about is you have a wine cellar, and the way that you would load up the wine cellar, imagine that it was mamish packed to capacity. Okay, it was as full as it can get. So how do they add barrels to the wine cellar? So first they would fill up the entire floor with barrels, right? So you could not move anywhere, right? And so let's just say this: it was a row 10 barrels by 10 barrels, like mamish. It was all filled up, 10 barrels deep, 10 barrels wide. Great. Now you have more barrels that you want to get, so you start making a second layer, and so on top of the first layer, you now add another 100 barrels. 10 barrels deep, 10 barrels wide. And you keep on doing that all the way until you get all the way up to the ceiling, okay? So you have several rows or layers of barrels, okay? So Rav Yehuda says that according to Beis Shammai, when they say that it is 2 rows upon the entire cellar, so according to Rav Yehuda, what it means is that if you take like the first, let's say from floor to ceiling, okay? So let's just say you manage to get 10 rows tall, 10 rows wide, let's say, and also 10 rows deep, okay? So according to Yehuda, we're talking about that first row that you see when you walk into the cellar, right? What's staring you in the face, which is going to be 10 barrels tall and 10 barrels wide. So I guess it'll be 100 barrels, right? That first row that is staring you in the face, that's 10 rows wide and 10 rows tall. So that one and the next one in front of it as well. So 2 of those rows. So it would be like 200 barrels. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shura Achas Kimin Gam. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's like a kimin gam, which is basically, a gam is like the Hebrew letter chaf. I think it came up in Masechta Eruvin as well. But basically, according to Rabbi Yochanan, what it would be is, it would be that first row of Rabbi Yehuda, i.e. the first row that's 10 barrels tall and 10 barrels wide. But it would then also be the top row, meaning that goes from the front until all the way to the back, as deep as it goes. And we said that we're talking about 10 rows deep as well. So it would basically be like, imagine like a house. So imagine, and it's got 4 walls and a ceiling. So imagine you take one of those walls and the ceiling. So that's what we're talking about. So the wall, when you walk into the cellar, the wall that you're staring at, and the wall of barrels that you're staring at, plus the sort of ceiling level of these barrels, the top level of these barrels, that's 10 barrels wide and 10 barrels deep. Oh my gosh. I just feel like I'm back in Eruvin talking about, instead of barrels, though, we're talking about tfachim, whatever it is. Tani Kavasi to Rav Yehuda, Tani Kavasi to Rav Yochanan. We have brises supporting both Rav Yehuda and Rav Yochanan. Tani Kavasi to Rav Yehuda. Beis Shammai Omrim says Beis Shammai shtei shuros al pnei kol hamarte. If you have 2 rows on the face of all of the cellar, v'shtei shuros sha'amru, and when they said these 2 rows, min ha'aretz v'ad shmei korah, it is from the ground until the ceiling, and it's 2 of those rows, one and then immediately followed by the next. Tani Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan, and we have a brisa supporting Rabbi Yochanan, shtei shuros al pnei kol hamartef, that when Beis Shammai says it's 2 rows on all of the cellar, chitzona roa es pesach, so it's talking about the outer row that looks at the stairs at the door, i.e. it's when you walk in the door, it's the first row that you see. Ve'alyona roa es korah, and it's also that ceiling row. But anything below that top layer of barrels and anything deeper, within that first row, that first wall of barrels, you wouldn't have to check anything like in the middle. Basil says the 2 outer rows, that they are the top rows. Rav, says Rav, Elyona v'shelamata imena. So says Rav, if we're still looking at our what is it? I don't even know how many it would be. So in our case, it would be 1,000 barrels. Okay, right? Each row, each layer would be like 100 barrels. It would be 10 barrels deep and 10 barrels wide. And then we said that we have, we just made this up arbitrarily, but that we have 10 layers of this. So according to Rav, it would be Elyona v'shelamata imena. So if we're looking at that first wall of barrels, so it would be the top 10 barrels, like wide, right, from the left to the right. So the top row of barrels on that first wall, and then the row right beneath it, right? So if the first row on the floor was row 1 and the highest row was row 10, so we're talking about row 10 and row 9, okay? So 20 barrels. So Shmuel says that it's that top row, but also the one deeper in. So also 20 barrels, but it's going to be also starting with row 10 and all 10 barrels across, but instead of going down to row 9, you stay on that top row, but go in more, 1 row. My time with the Rav, diek chitzonos. How come Rav is talking about where both rows are on the outer wall? Elyonos katani, but it says shehena elyonos, that they are the top one. But according to Rav, one of them is actually the second from the top. So the mute tatar de tatyaso. So when it says elyonos, it's only come to exclude the ones that from rows 8 and down. Shmuel Amar says Shmuel Elyona v'shelifnimei mena. It's the top row, right, and also the one that goes in one. So my taima diek elyonos. How come Shmuel is focusing on the top layer, right? To say that both of them are on the top row, right? V'hachitzonos katani. But it also Basil also said the outer ones, i.e. So shouldn't that be the outer row? One of your rows, Shmuel, is inner more. So katani, so limute gavyosa de gavyosa. No, that is just coming to exclude the ones that are like even more inner than the first 2 inner rows, i.e. rows like 8 to 1 going in, going deep. Okay, fine. Reb Chia tani kavasi de Rav. Reb Chia teaches like his, nephew Rav. V'chulu tanoi Tanu Kavase de Shmuel. All of the other Tanaim taught like Shmuel, Vilchsa Kavase de Shmuel, and the halacha is like Shmuel, that's talking about the top row and also the one that's inner from it. You got that? I don't know. I guess Erev Pesach, when you're cleaning your wine barrels, let's talk. That was Daf Ches of Masechta Pesachim. There was packed with stuff. So, reasons to use a candle rather than a torch. Reb Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, well, because a candle can get you into the chorim mitzdakim, all those little holes and cracks. Reb Zvid says, well, because a candle shines its light forward, whereas opposed to a torch shines its light backwards. Rav Papa said, well, because a torch, you're going to be scared they're going to burn your house down, you're not going to focus on searching for chametz. Ravina says, well, because a torch has a jumping flame and we want a stationary flame that you can focus. Places where you do not bring chametz are exempt, right? So such as wine cellars, oil, where you keep your oil, where you keep your grain, your chicken coop, things like that. And we did say though that if you go into your wine cellar in the middle of the meal with your bread, well then you would have to do bedikas chametz. You do not have to do bedikas chametz in a hole because of a sakana. If you have a hole in the wall, what's the sakana? First we said, well, if the wall falls down, there might be scorpions. And then Reb Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, well, if your neighbor sees you doing your hocus pocus bedikas chametz stuff, you might get concerned that you're doing hocus pocus. Messengers of mitzvah do not get harmed. Shluchei mitzvah einan nizoken. So interestingly, we said, but also be responsible. So, yes, well, you won't get shluchei mitzvah einan nizoken, but don't also look for harm. And then then we said, okay, so I get it if you're doing it on the way to the mitzvah. What about on the way back? So Rav said he's not sure about the way back. Rebbe Lazar says that no, it applies to the way back as well. And we learned that from when you go to be Ole Regel and just kind of leave everything, and God guarantees that everything you'll find it as you left it. Then we had some interesting experience design kind of stuff, right? That the reason why there's no Peros Ginosa or no Chami Tiberia in Jerusalem is because then you might lose focus of what the real reason why you're being Ole Regel is, which is to visit God on the holidays and to bring your korbanos. But all you're gonna take away from it is that there was really good fruit and nice schwitzes. Beis Shammai, their opinion regarding the wine cellars. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's talking about the outer two walls from floor to ceiling. Rabbi Yochanan says it is the outer wall from floor to ceiling plus the top layer of barrels. Kind of like a house if you take one wall and the roof. And then Beis Hillel says, according to Rav, it's talking about the top two rows from left to right, so rows 9 and 10. And Shmuel says it's talking about both rows are row 10, but one is sort of in more. And Reb Chia Paskin's like Rav, all the other Tanaim Paskin like Shmuel. That was Daf Ches of Masechta Pesachim. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Peace out.